We'll begin episode 2 in just a moment, but here's what we learned from the last episode. The Thundercats had just arrived on Third Earth, but so were the mutants, Slythe, Jackalman, and Munkian. So now, episode 2 begins where the last episode left off. Lino, who is now all grown up, has his band of Thundercats, Panthro, Chitara, Tyra, the kittens, and of course his faithful companion Snarf. We also learned in the last episode that his mentor, Jaga, has since passed away. And there's Panthro inside the wrecked ship. And what was he doing? He just got rid of all the engine parts because, as he says, that the engines of the ship has now been shot. But aha, it doesn't mean that Panther could do something else with it. And what was he doing? He was about to build a thunder tank of his own, but that would come later. As for the Thunderkins, they were busy unloading their food, but luckily it survived intact. However, Tiger got after them for playing with their food. There was work to be done. Well, according to Snurf, when he said in his case that there's no need to work on an empty stomach, of course he's not kidding. Anyway, back with the mutants, speaking of which, Slythe just told his henchmen that this is no time for sightseeing. They had work to do, just like what the Thundercats did. So speaking of which, back with the Thundercats, Panthro wanted Lionel to help him out. So Lionel has a suggestion. Shouldn't there be a good idea if we scout out the area a little bit? But Panthro made his case to say we need all the help that we can get. Then Tiger, who agrees with Lionel, says, "Come on, Lionel's right. I think it is a good idea to scout out the area. After all, Lionel's the lord of the Thundercats. Our safety is indeed his responsibility." Snarf wanted to go along with Lionel, but Lionel refused and told him, "When are you going to get through your head? I'm not a child anymore, and I definitely don't need a nursemaid." "All cheer up, Snarf," Tiger said. "You're still needed around here. Oh, Lionel, take the claw shield and the sword just in case if you need us." So Lionel agrees with Tiger's suggestion. So after that, Lionel heads off. So Panther wanted to know from Tiger, "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Not only did Tiger agree that that is a good idea, but then said, "Now just remember, Lionel has been in a suspension capsule. I mean, sure, he's all grown up, but he still has the mind of a child, so to speak." So, anyway, back with the mutants, Jackalman and Mungan told Sly, their leader, that there must be some kind of civilization that's happening right here. "True," Sly says, "but we don't have time to ponder that right this minute." Then Sly told his mutants that if the Thundercats should have a new home right here on Third Earth, then maybe we should too. Then Slythe also said it'll be a time for himself and his mutants to build Castle Plunder, but that would come later. Anyway, Jackalman just spotted something up ahead, a pyramid, and it's all black. And that's not all. It's right next door to the desert of Seeking Sands. The mutant ship was flying all over the Black Pyramid until suddenly what the mutants didn't realize is that the spear's power has zapped the mutant ship, and that caused it to go flying out of control. And then finally, thank goodness for the mutants, they landed safely intact into the desert of Seeking Sands. After the mutants got out of the wrecked ship, they had no idea just what was going on and what was it that zapped their ship just moments ago. Then before you know it, they were right in front of the Black Pyramid. Anyway, something just opened the front part of the pyramid by itself. Jackalman, Monkey, and Slythe, the leader of the mutants, just couldn't believe it. They had no idea what's going on. Then the voice says, "Come in, come in." As the mutants went ahead and armed themselves just in case, but the voice says, "Your weapons won't be necessary. Please follow the ball of light." Then suddenly an orb of light came right in front of the mutants. As the mutants went inside the pyramid, there were hieroglyphs all over the wall. Next thing you know, they went further and further down the hallway. And that's when they saw the tomb chamber, with four statues surrounding the giant cauldron on the floor. But that's not all. There's a sarcophagus inside the skull sculpture right against the wall. So even though till this very minute the mutants has never seen a tomb chamber just like the one they seen, But then the eyes of the skull sculpture started to glow, and so was the sarcophagus. And inside, oh, we're about to meet the baddest of the bad, Mumm-Ra, the ever living. And he's in his mummified form, in the red cloak, no doubt. So after the sarcophagus opened, Mumm-Ra introduced himself to the mutants, and he says, "If I'm not mistaken, you're on a mission to seek the Eye of Thundera. Am I correct?" Not only did Slythe, the leader of the mutants, said that it's indeed correct, but he wants to know from Murmur, "You've heard of it?" "Well, not only did I have heard of it," Murmur says, "but I knew all about it ever since when Third Earth became First Earth, once upon a time." Then Jackalman was next to speak in his case to say, "Even if it were true, what makes you think we can help you with that?" "So you dare to mock me and my powers?" Murmur asked. So what Mumm-Ra did is that he summoned his power to make the pyramids shake. Monkey was worried and then told his friends, "Well, our communications device on the ship isn't exactly damaged. We can contact our other mutants, and we can damage this place." "Really?" Mumm-Ra says. "Then I guess you'll have to see for yourself." And when the mutants did see for themselves inside the cauldron, what they saw was unbelievable. Their own ship sank into the desert of sinking sands, lost forever. "So you see, without your ship," Mumm-Ra says, "you're stranded here and you have lost hope of ever contacting anybody else. So you see, without my assistance in any way, you'll perish for sure." So Monkey goes first to ask Slive what he thought of it. Then Jackalman goes next to ask a question: "Do we really have a choice?" Then Jackalman suggested maybe we should go along with it. "Yes, I suppose that it's only right to join in your conquest, Mumm-Ra. For now, anyway," Slive suggested. So Mumm-Ra also agrees that it's only fair that we share the power in the Eye of Thundera, just enough for the two of us. "Of course," Sly said. So Slife and the mutants agree that with he and Mumm-Ra teaming up, they will share the power of the Eye of Thundera for what it's worth. So Mumm-Ra said, "I'm glad we can all agree with that." "Even better, Mumm-Ra, I'll show you where to find the Eye of Thundera." And there the mutants saw it. Inside the cauldron was Lino and his claw shield and that legendary sword. And what Lino's doing is that he's traveling all by himself in the forest. So after the mutants saw what had happened, then Sly says, "Well, there's only one problem. How do we get to where Lionel is so we can ambush him somehow?" But before the mutants can be sent on their way by Mumm-Ra, Mumm-Ra in his head just said to himself that there's no way he can leave his tomb unattended for some unknown reason. So guess what Mumm-Ra did? He decided that as the mutants part of the bargain, he transported the mutants to where Lino is, and along with his sword and his claw shield. So that's what Mumm-Ra did. So back in the forest, that's Lino practicing with his sword. That's until he heard a noise nearby. To investigate further, Lionel saw a bunch of animals from down below, from where he's standing on. Anyway, when Lionel goes down to attack, but for some unknown reason, the sword wouldn't allow him to do it, and it just flung right out of his hand. As Lionel tries all his might to get the sword off the ground, it wouldn't budge. Then suddenly the spirit of Jaga told him, "The sword will never obey you. It's not programmed to destroy everything that's good. It could be only be used for evil. Now remember that." So after Jaga disappeared, the sword told Lionel that there's a warning. So, as any good guy would do, Lionel looked through the sword's eye. At first he saw nothing. But then all of a sudden the mutants started appearing out of nowhere and they started attacking Lionel to snatch the sword away from him. Then, long story short, after Lionel tries desperately to call his friends from his sword, but Sly, the leader of the mutants, covered Lionel's mouth. And then minutes later, he finally, at long last, Lionel that is, summoned the Thundercats signal. Meanwhile, back at the ship's wreck, Pedro sees the signal first, and so do the Thunderkittens. Since Tiger and Chitara are not available at the moment, so it's now up to them to save Lino. So back with Lino, speaking of which, he's still fighting with the mutants, until moments later, Panthro and the kittens arrive just in time. Anyway, Panthro lifts up Slythe, the leader of the mutants, but just as soon as they appeared, the mutants suddenly disappeared. The Thundercats find it very weird. What made it also weird is that there's not a ship nearby. Anyway, Panthro told Lino what happened with Tiger and Chitara. Well, unfortunately for them, they were looking for a place to put the cat's lair. That will be important later. So Lionel made a suggestion that he should go ahead and look for them, and Panthro agrees. Back at the Black Pyramid, after the mutants appeared in front of Mumm-Ra, Mumm-Ra could tell that he's getting really upset with the mutants for not doing the job right. What's worse of it all is that Mumm-Ra could tell that they couldn't handle Lino either. Well, we only had him for a second, Jackalman said when he pleaded his case. Then out of nowhere, the rest just showed up. Then Monkey goes next to speaking his case, but stepping out of line to tell Mumm-Ra, if you think it's so simple, you should do it yourself next time. Then Slythe goes next to agree with Monkey and to say, I haven't seen your powers yet. Really? Mumm-Ra asks, you dare to mock me? Then see my powers, then you shall get. And so, for the first time, Mumm-Ra did just that. He transformed himself into this monstrous form, with a little help from the ancient spirit of evil statues, of course. The next thing that Mumm-Ra did after that is to fly himself out of the pyramid. So back with Lino still looking for Tiger and Chitara, that's when Lino approached a strange black tar in the middle of the forest. Although it's hot to the touch but very sticky. But then minutes later, Mumm-Ra shows up in front of Lino. Anyway, Mumm-Ra and Lino were having a combat with each other until the sword landed blade first into the tar. Luckily for Lionel, he managed to grab it by the handle, the sword that is, but this time when Lionel tries to call his friends again, this time it didn't work. Anyway, long story short, Mumm-Ra told Lionel in his case to give it up because his friends are not going to save him this time. But aha, it doesn't mean that Lionel has plan B in mind, his claw shield. And thanks to Lionel's claw shield, Mumm-Ra saw face to face what dreads him the most, his own reflection. Back with Chitara and Tigra, they were looking for a location for the cat's lair, and they found it until Chitara told Tigra that she thought she heard something coming from nearby. Tigra agrees and goes along with her. So back with Lino fighting with Mumm-Ra, and of course Mumm-Ra being defeated by his own reflection and screaming in horror. Until finally at long last he went to his mummified form, Mumm-Ra that is, and went back to his pyramid. So by the time that Lionel's friends arrived, Mumm-Ra had already left. Chitara and Tiger were the first to arrive on the scene, and so were Panther and the kittens. Not only did they see that their leader Lionel's okay, but they saw something or someone flying in the sky. Panther was the first to ask a question of who it was. Well, that was Mumm-Ra, Lionel said, and he's known as the ever living. So back at the Black Pyramid, after Mumm-Ra's being defeated by his own reflection, even the mutants can see that Mumm-Ra too had failed his mission. So Mumm-Ra went back in his sarcophagus. So you know what this means. The Thundercats are not only going to have the mutants to deal with, but Mumm-Ra as well, since they formed a, quote, unholy alliance. So back in the forest with Lionel and the Thundercats, Lionel told his friends how Mumm-Ra got defeated. He said it was Mumm-Ra's own reflection that did him in, and it was from Lionel's claw shield. Panthro couldn't believe it, and neither did Tigra, that it was his own reflection that defeated him. So Panthro told Lionel, you know, it's awfully foolish to have him face him by yourself. But in your case, Chitara said, that was mighty brave of you. And of course, Snarf happens to agree with Chitara. So we know what this also means. Now that Mumm-Ra and the mutants are teaming up, who knows what kind of plan they'll be coming up next. So that ends episode 2.